to educators, we want to open with a ministry of education that develops a curriculum for all ghetto schools. Not just for Chicago, but once we develop it, it has to be accepted. See, we're like colonies now. Not the 13 colonies, but in all the major cities, there's a ghetto. The Chinese not called a ghetto. They're in a separate community, but they control the education, the politics, the business of their community. And they function pretty good, separate.
In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. I can never thank Allah enough for raising the Honorable Elijah Muhammad.
Minister Louis Farrakhan.
I can never thank Allah enough for raising the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, the eternal leader of the Nation of Islam, and leaving us with a reminder in our midst and a guide, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. And it is in their names that I have the honor and privilege of welcoming you and greeting you in the words of peace and paradise. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the third episode of a new educational paradigm. And today I have joining me, Brother Toure Muhammad. And before we get started and get into this, I'm going to go ahead and ask him to introduce himself.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, who came to us in the person of Master Fard Muhammad. And I bear witness that the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad is his right hand, his exalted Christ, the messenger to us all. And I also bear witness that I wouldn't know about either one of them if it was not for that beautiful black man, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. So, I'm being brief in my introduction because I'm so excited. And I don't want to, to insult the intelligence of anybody that's there and say something that I have to explain. But I'm so thankful to be here today on this call with you, Brother Troy. I'm thankful for the opportunity to talk about this new education paradigm that is really at the core of our teaching. And it is, so important to our future. So by way of just a little background introduction, today I call myself a writer and digital strategist. I use the experience that I've combined, first starting off at the Final Call newspaper and in the early 90s as a journalist, as a reporter and a photographer, then going into the nonprofit world for a few years in labor and working for a senior member of the member of Congress and here in Illinois. And also along that way, I dipped in and out of MUI and taught school for about a year. I had a 7th and 8th grade class at MUI back in the early 90s as well, and spent about almost a year in the public school system. So the discussion about education is important, and I see the value in it, and I'm glad to talk to you today, brother.
Thank you, Brother Toure. I didn't know that you were a fellow MUI teacher. I taught at MUI for a few years as well.
Yes, sir. I recall.
Yeah. So one of the things is just to provide a little context, even though Brother Toure has been a teacher in the past, in the traditional, or what we typically would think of as an educator now, is that one of the things with this, bringing in the last episode, Dr. Ridgely, who is into agriculture, is that it was really important that not to just have educators discussing the new educational paradigm. As we look into the future, we know that what we end up becoming is determined on what the educational system is looking like. And I recently came from a conference, and it was dealing with educational technology. And I noticed as I sat in the room, being, the only Black person in the room, and you could see even with the Caucasians in the room, there was 3 different types of conversations that were happening as we talked about this topic. And this kind of leads us into the three questions that on all of the shows that I asked, which are, what is the purpose of education? What should we as Black people expect education to do for our people? And then, of course, the most important, because we have to make sure that we're planning something for the future, and that's what should we be including in a curriculum to fill the expectations. But in that conversation that was going on, I noticed that three types of levels of conversation were going on as it relates to preparing our children in the educational space. And that was a discussion of preparing our children for today's world. So really not considering, you know, what the world may be in the future, preparing our children for the future world. And then the last one was preparing children to create a new world. So in those things, it's like really I listened to what the talk was, and you could tell what role each of those individuals play in society. So I think that those three things are really important as we go into this. But with that said, I want to go ahead and throw that first question at you. What is the purpose of education?
Well, of course, that's a very powerful and explosive question, and we can always go to the root of the definition of the word, as we have been taught to do in our teachings, to define words and to understand words, because we know we have one understanding and sometimes our enemy has another understanding.
Yes, sir.
So of course, the root of the word educate means to bring out of the student what is in them, of their talents and their skills and their gifts, and help them to develop those skills so that they can be of benefit to themselves and their community and the world. And so if we ask the question of our enemy, and if we had an opportunity to put the spectacles of supreme wisdom on him, and those spectacles were forced him to tell the truth, then he would say that his education, the purpose of his education as it relates to us, is to make us a tool and a slave, right? We know in our lessons that our enemy keeps us illiterate, so that he can use us for that purpose. So yeah, they definitely do help bring out our gifts and talents and skills in some ways. Other times they suppress the talents and skills of us as students in their educational system. But ultimately, whatever we do, they use it for their aim and their purpose to keep us as a tool and a slave, right? But the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, gave us a new paradigm, of discussion to talk about the importance of education and the importance of us controlling our education. It was so important for him that he went to jail for it. And many of the early followers went to jail so that we could establish an independent school. And he talked about in Message to the Black Man on page 39 that we have to have an education that will free us, that would not make us a tool and a slave for our enemy. I'm paraphrasing. I do have a little video, a little image of that quote from page 39. I don't know if you're able to pull it up, but he makes it real clear what the purpose of education is. And yes, sir, there it is. Thank you. So on page 39, this is not the only place he talks about education, but here he says, my people should get an education that will benefit their own people and not an education adding to the storehouse of their teacher. We need education, but an education which removes us from the shackles of slavery and servitude. Get an education, not an education that leaves us in an inferior position and without a future. Get an education, but not an education that leaves us looking to the slave master for a job. Man, that's powerful right there. And I think that's absolutely what our beloved minister, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, has done and is doing, and is encouraging us to do more of, to understand that we have to control our education. And as the clip you said, he highlights that it's not just for the quote unquote registered Black Muslims, but it's for all of our people.
Thank you, Brother Toure. Now, you talked about, and of course in there, it talks about the last portion. It says, get an education, but not an education that leaves us looking to the slave master for a job. You know, so one of the things, you know, as we look at education, and we get into this a little bit more in that second question, you know, is you talked about what the current educational system does and the impact that it has on us. But in with the quote of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, you get into what he says education should do. So in the broader sense, as we matriculate through the educational system, what are some of the things, you know, right now, when you think about education, there's standards and they expect you to know certain things. But what happens now, and in many instances, people are graduating from institutions of higher learning and without skills to really do anything for themselves. And that kind of ties into, you know, why I wanted to bring someone who is an entrepreneur like yourself, who is actually going through the educational system. But I know that there's some things that you've learned that didn't necessarily happen there. And, you know, you may reflect on things that you wish you would have known or wish you have been taught in that system that would have better prepared you for what you're doing right now, which is an entrepreneur. So can you kind of touch on, you know, what are some of those things that you think, you know, education should really be preparing our children for?
Absolutely. Well, you know, from my perspective as a business owner in the realm of media and publishing, you know, I really wish that I had been given some business principle skills while I was in college. The only thing that I got was the mechanics of how to write a news story, basically. Right. But there was I didn't even see it in the curriculum to pique my interest to the idea of not just being a reporter, but being a publisher. And right. So if whatever endeavor that we go into, if we're not being taught how to manage and run, or really how to create, keep it going, then we're not really learning anything but to be a part of somebody else's program. And, you know, I don't know, even in business school, oftentimes the students of my colleagues, my friends who were in the business part of Morehouse College when I was in college, they weren't learning how to start a business. They weren't talking about being an entrepreneur. Their whole idea was to go to school, get that business degree so that they could run some big company, right? So I think that when you reflect on, which I think was so beautiful that you highlight, at least in our conversation when you were talking to me, on the purpose of the Ministry of Trade and Commerce and how it highlights that there has to be an idea and the teaching of entrepreneurism. And the only way that can be done is to tie it to the education ministry of our program. So getting the babies and getting them young and getting them thinking about being in business is so critical and important. So I had to say, in short, I didn't learn anything about business and didn't even think about being in business until I got touched by the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad through one of his students, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, that top premier student, and he started talking about doing for self. And when I came into the Nation of Islam in '89, most of us who were young FOI coming into the ranks were given several things. We were access to the clean and fresh products. We were given access to, of course, the bean pie and the Final Call newspaper. And also we were being shown how to go buy fish and double yolk eggs wholesale. And so now we were in the community with an arsenal. Well, I was in college, man, making $500, $600 a week, you know, back in '90. and you know, and not being out that long of a time, you know. So that idea of being in business really attracted me, but I was now conflicted because I had this desire to be a journalist, and I also had this desire to be an entrepreneur. So hence, I created my own media company.
Thank you, Brother Toure. Actually, I was in the process of actually trying to bring up that direct quote or the description of the Ministry of Trade and Commerce. So give me 1 second. I think I can do it this way. So right here. So basically it says that the Trade and Commerce, which you can find these ministries at justiceorelse.com/ministries. The Ministry of Trade and Commerce is responsible for the growth and development of the business and economic interests of the society. This ministry is dynamic in nature, relying on the input of consultants with experience and success in business and economics. It analyzes the economic state of the community and develops programs and policies for growth and stability on the basis of the needs of the community. It translates skills, talents, and interests of the community into viable revenue streams and works with the Ministry of Education to encourage entrepreneurship. So it's a beautiful thing that even before this description was put up, is that, you know, you in particular, but we were actually doing those things. And, you know, I was listening to, there's a clip that we may get to later on that you shared with me from the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, but on YouTube. But after that clip, there was another sister who came up and she talked about, you know, Black Wall Street, and she talked about all of the things that we were doing, basically coming right after slavery. And
Right.
when you start talking about the entrepreneur spirit that you had back in the 90s, and how we can look now and see some of the gains that we've made in the past as it relates to, and basically in every area, as a community, you know, that it seems in many ways we've taken steps back. And of course, I'm always gonna looking at education again, you know, and we can, it's very evident with all the issues that are going on with the educational systems throughout the country. And, you know, with the Chicago public school system, with the issues with funding, you know, all of these things that are issues right now, and economics, basically everything is you can see these many instances that things are stepping back or taking steps back. So with that in mind, you know, what is it that you see in terms of, if you look at the comparison to Black Wall Street, if we go back that far, right? Or even if not that far, if we go back to the 90s, and you can see that there was a bigger boom of entrepreneurship. What role can education play in, you know, elevating us, you know, to get back on the ball, so to speak?
Man, yes, sir. Absolutely beautiful question. And, you know, a big part of that is, like the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan has said recently, history is best qualified to reward our research, right? When we look at history and we talk about Black Wall Street, that's a wonderful thing. And we talk about what we accomplished then, but we have to also analyze what actually happened. And of course, we know about the bombing aspect of Black Wall Street, but we didn't get bombed in Harlem. We didn't get bombed in Bronzeville, right? So that wasn't a single factor that led to the demise of Black businesses, right? So if we look at it from, and this is why this is so exciting to me, because it's really a combination of this understanding of business, marketing, media, and, as the minister talked about in Tennessee, warfare, right? Business is warfare. So we were getting some economic strength, as you said, right after slavery, because we didn't have any choice, right? And it was kind of thrust upon the white society. So they hadn't quite figured out what to do with these free Black folks, right?
Right.
And so we knew, okay, we got to get together. We got to do for self. We have to make a way for ourselves, because we cannot assimilate into white society. See, one thing is that they were clear they did not have a choice. They could not assimilate into white society, so they built their own, and they were successful, right? But then, as they were in Black Wall Street being successful, and then as Marcus Garvey came on the scene, and you had some success in Harlem, and you had some success here in Chicago, right? At the same time, for 300 years prior, we were always being told that everything that white folks do and make is better, and we weren't really making anything of our own. We were making it for them, right? So we started to be able to read, and we're reading print newspapers, Sears, Roebuck, and Montgomery Ward are singing catalogs all over the country talking about how great these products are. Then radio came into existence, and you had radio corporations advertising on radio saying how great their products were. Then TV comes into existence, right? And now we see how great these products are that white folks make. And then integration came in. And as soon as we had the opportunity to leave our neighborhoods to go shop downtown, it was like a rubber band with the rubber band was being pulled and pulled. And when the opportunity came, we ran right out, right? So marketing and the influence of media had a big role in controlling the way we thought. And so now we go out, there was that joke. I don't know if it was actually true or not, but there was a white business owner who said that the best way for him to get business from black people is to put a sign up to say no black folks allowed. And the next thing you know, we're going to be protesting and picking a demand to go spend our money with that business, right? So as this is happening, now integration is here. And now the businesses began to go down because we're not patronizing them. Then we go into apathy in our community when it relates to being an entrepreneur, right? In the 70s, after we went out and our businesses failed because we ran everywhere else, then now the thing was, it was a me idea. It's all about me. And it's all about what company can I go find to work for? And prestige and honor in our community began to be about being the first Negro to work at Xerox, the first Negro to work here, right? So now our prestige went from those giants in business in our community to who do you work for, right? So being an entrepreneur was not glamorous anymore in our community. So now we come to the 80s, and in the 90s, now the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, his message and his example in 75 was still impressed upon people. Because I hear people of that age who were adults and children who still talk about what they saw the Honorable Elijah Muhammad doing. But, after that, after everything went down, and then we come to the 80s and 90s, we have to now, the resurgence is talking about us uplifting and highlighting and heralding the black entrepreneur as a pioneer, right? We have to, but because in our mind, and this is of course is a general statement, but in our mind, because we don't see our businesses having a measure of success that our oppressor has right now, and we forget the historical things that led to it. It's like, man, if two people start off at the beginning of a race and one person is given a head start and it's a marathon, and that one person gets to the halfway mark before the next person is able to start running, right? If you at the finish line, you say, man, Walmart dusted the mom and pop store. Well, yeah, of course it did, but you went at the beginning and you didn't see that huge head start that he had, right? But he was only 2 miles behind him. Imagine what would happen if they had an even playing field. So today we have to have in our education system and lessons on black business pioneers. And like the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, study the white man, for he's successful in his business. He makes no excuses for his failure. Now, oftentimes when we quote that quote from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, we're often quoting it to compliment white people in business, right? But it ain't necessarily always the case that we're studying the way they've done something because it is great and it was great for the world, right? Just the soap is great, so now you're gonna talk about, man, look and check out how great the soap smells. Look how beautiful the box is. Well, yeah, that's an aspect of business to study, but let's talk about also how they that company forced people to work for 300 years for no pay. Right, and made no. Look at all the things, every aspect of their business, right? And then we begin to understand how business has ill affected us, and then we'll understand how to fight back against it, right? So I'm highlighting it to say, because when I read that, it encouraged me to study a little bit more a guy named Edward Bernays. Edward Bernays is considered the father of public relations in America, right? Study the white man because he's successful in this business. Edward Bernays was successful in World War I and encouraging, developing a campaign to encourage Americans to support World War I against Germany. Now, one of the things that was amazing about that is because at that time, there were a lot of Germans in America. There were a lot of Americans of German descent. So we had to convince them, along with all of America, to fight the Germans. And once he did that, they took him into corporate world. And there was one company in particular, a tobacco company, who hired him to change the social norms when it came to smoking cigarettes. This guy, who was it? George, I think his name was George Washington Hill. He was owner of the American Tobacco Company. He brought in Edward Bernays and said, we got to get more women smoking cigarettes, because if we can do that, we're going to make a lot of money. We've tapped out pretty much of men smoking cigarettes, but women is an untapped thing, right? Now, at that time, it was taboo for women to smoke in public, right? So their campaign was to do two things: encourage and show and prove to white women that if you smoke cigarettes, you wouldn't get fat. You would stay slim. And they encouraged, and the other thing was that if you smoke a cigarette, because you're being told that it's not right for a woman to smoke in public, this is part of your liberation. Wow. This is part of you being a woman. So they tied it to the women's suffrage movement. And so now it was the thing. If you were an independent woman, you smoked, right? And if you didn't want to get fat, you smoked. I have a friend, now he's a male friend, but 5 years ago, we grew up together. I've been knowing him since grammar school. And every now and then when I see him, family function or whatever, and he pull out a cigarette. I said, man, you still smoking cigarettes? He said, man, the cigarettes keep my metabolism going and it don't make sure I don't gain weight. And I didn't really have a comeback at that moment other than to say, but you're killing your lungs at the same time, right? I knew what to say about the ill effects of cigarettes, but I had never heard of that reference to cigarettes and keeping your weight down until I read this dude, Edward Bernays. So now here's something that they started in 1940s, a campaign for women to keep them from gaining weight. And this dude in 2000, and it was past 2000, believes that same idea that was promoted in an advertising campaign. So if we don't understand in business how effective that is, so our children need to know this. They need to learn about the history of the connection between marketing and business and the whole nine, so they know when they're being manipulated, and then they can use propaganda properly to encourage people to do stuff that is going to save their life as opposed to kill their life. And we become the merchants of life as opposed to the enemy who's the merchants of death.
Man, Brother Toure, you touched on so many things. I took a few notes, but I want to make sure that I direct people to that lecture, the minister you're talking about. It's at store.finalcall.com, which it was a conference that you had the privilege and honor of attending and being on the stage with the minister. But that lecture is Business is Warfare by the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. It was delivered April 16, 2016 in Nashville, Tennessee. But if you go to store.finalcall, you should be able to check that out. I'll go through a few of those points. Well, actually, I want to touch on the point on just kind of where that title even comes from, you know, and as a reference to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad discussing three sciences that we're not taught. Right. The science of business, mating, and warfare. And of course, I'm going to still point it back to education, and because even in how it's said is that we're not taught the sciences of these three things: business, mating, and warfare. So can you tie those in and kind of, especially, you know, from your perspective as an entrepreneur and a businessman, but how do those other things connect? And how does education, is because they're talking about they're not being taught. How do those things connect, and how do you see those being put into our curriculum and being put into the educational system?
Wow, man, you know, I consistently, I think about that a lot because, right, because we're told and it's made clear that those are the three things that we were never taught. And so the question is, how do we develop a curriculum that teaches our children something that we weren't taught, right? And then also, when we learn it, we want to learn it from the perspective of Allah and the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and not from the perspective necessarily of the enemy, right? The minister, when you talk about the science of warfare, and the minister talks about military and the FOI and the meaning of FOI, the book, The Meaning of FOI, he talks about how we're not like the devil's army. You know, we're not here to harm and hurt our people. We don't carry weapons, right? We come to save, and we come to be a savior and a saint. Of course, I'm paraphrasing, but that's the spirit of his message, was that we're not like their military. We don't carry weapons, and we come to give life. So we have to, as students, take from this vast body of wisdom that we have and pull out all those elements of the teachings that highlight the science of business, right? We can now pull out, we can go to the archives of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and talk about and learn about how to birth a God, right? And we can understand so many principles of reproducing based upon lessons that he's given us from his life, and the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, their lives highlight that. You know, when we're choosing a mate, then how did they go choose a mate, right? And what principles that they've talked about that were important that we can now say this is part of a curriculum that we need to teach our children, right? And when we look at it from the enemy's perspective, when the minister talks about those powerful ones who are controlling, I mean, just in media alone, we have 90% of the media we consume is controlled by 6 corporations. And 2 of those corporations, there's one person who has major influence and 2 of them. So it's really 5. You know, 5 corporations control 90% of what we consume. So if we look at the control of media and how, when we go back to, I mean, some of the biggest lessons you always hear about Hitler and how he used propaganda, right, to sway the German people, right? And then we sometimes look at that history as if it's not and has not happened right here at home. Right. Well, let's go back. Edward Bernays, who is the father of public relations, encouraged even German descent Americans to fight the war against Germany. Hitler rose in World War II, right? Hitler took a guy who was in Edward Bernays' camp, who was of German descent, and that was his propaganda guy, right? So Hitler learned how to manipulate the masses from the guy here, Edward Bernays, in America. Oh, and by the way, Edward Bernays was the nephew of Sigmund Freud.
Wow.
So the understanding of psychology was all in what he was doing and how to manipulate and influence people, right? So when we talk about the science of mating, the minister talked about how a lot of these that are in power, the DuPonts, the Rockefellers, man, when you look at the England, the Queen of England and all that, these are families. These are not, you know, these are generational families going down the line 100 years, 150, 200 years, and they remain, the Rothschilds, they remain in control and power. So there's obviously some lessons in that, and how, because we don't, our children, for the most part, don't continue in what we lay out for them, right? We're happy in the Nation of Islam, or someone's happy in business when their child is going to continue the work of the mission of resurrecting our people, or the dry cleaners, or whatever that business is. Oftentimes you say, man, why is the business failing right now? They've been around for 50 years. Man, because the children went wayward. The children didn't want to keep the business going, right? So what are those principles and ideas on how we can learn to keep our family intact? And the minister and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, when you see all of those who have come from them, who are a part of the work and who are here present trying to help in the work, man, we have some great examples that we need to pull out those principles so we can continue to duplicate their success, right? So now that's the science of mating and how it relates to both business and our nation growth, which is really one and the same, yes, right? Sir. So then you talk about the science of business itself. So we talked about a little bit about military, but then the science of business itself is, man, every war. Now, we don't know necessarily everything that happened prior to the past 6,000 years in terms of warfare. We've had some lessons and some ideas about some huge disagreements, right? The brother who decided because nobody would speak his language, he wanted to blow up the earth, and that's how we got the moon up there. But I don't know who's all watching this, so I don't want to start it into a line that I have to go too deep and explain or refer you to somewhere. But the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan highlight and show us how every war that was fought, American war, has been about business. It's been about money. It's been about resources to make money, right? So oftentimes, and the minister, even as we talk about right now, he talks about collecting and organizing with the street organizations so that they can be the protectors of the community and that they can go into business and see value and understand how business is run. But then their fearlessness has to be out front, because once we build something, we have to protect that which we build, right? So, you know, sometimes I think some of the people I run into who are not in the nation, and they have some very great ideas about business and are moving in a certain direction, they sometimes get a little off-put when I remind them, or I tell them, I say, man, listen, you're trying to do some great things in business. I really want you to come to the mosque, meet, and let's network and dialogue with people in the mosque, because if you're going to do what you want to do, the enemy's going to come after you. Now, matter of fact, you're going to all these different cities. What are you eating? Who are you eating from? I said, stop eating just whatever somebody put in your face. And you make sure that you know where the origin of that food comes from, right? You know, if you can, take somebody with you, right? You see, we don't think like that unless we've been touched by the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan to understand. We think, oh, it's just cute, and we're going to go take business from these white folks, and they're going to be okay with it, right? So we have to have in our curriculum lessons of history that pull out the principles that we can use, that they can use in the future to build business, to protect our community, and to properly find a mate that has the same vision that you have, so that you all can be working in harmony to improve yourself, your family, and the nation.
Thank you, Brother Toure. Every time you speak, you just give me more questions to ask, and I know we're not going to be able to get through them all. But one of the things you did talk about, which, you know, I had the honor and privilege of being a part of the Justice or Else local organizing committee here in Chicago with you. Yes. And you talked about pooling your resources. And, you know, I see you doing that all the time. And one of the big things with the Justice Else movement that's beautiful to see is that it's bringing our community together. You know, right. And, you know, we talk about the Nation of Islam, and when we really grow and we see, like I know you do, is that the Nation of Islam includes all of our people.
That's right.
And just being able to see people that actually are really getting that is a blessing, and how you pool your resources, not only with what we would say registered citizens of the nation, but the citizens that just, you know, the other citizens who are not necessarily registered. It's a beautiful thing. Yeah. But one of the things I want to touch on with that is with the whole justice or else movement, and you know, this new educational paradigm, I always like to make sure that we're connecting to that movement is not dead, and that two sides of that, justice or else. And I think that that's something that we need to make sure that we continue to push forward. And you've talked about it in different ways, but mostly really on the or else, which is good. And I want to push that more as well. But looking at the justice, that the importance of pushing the call for justice, which is really holding those outside of our community, as well as those inside of our community accountable. But the or else is that if they don't do what they should do, then we're not going to wait for them, but we're going to continue to move on. So can you kind of talk about that as it relates to the business, and make sure you're touching on both sides on what that call for justice is, but also knowing that we're not going to wait for those who, you know, haven't done right by us to do right by us. Thank you.
Man, brother, that's a beautiful question. So, you know, on one hand, I've heard the minister say on various occasions, when we talk about reparations, when we talk about justice, that he gives us a picture of what justice would look like if the enemy was willing to give it to us. Right? And not that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad may have ever thought that, oh, yes, they'll probably give us separate states and territories of our own, and they'll take care of us for 30 to 40 years until we're able to survive for ourselves, right? I don't know if he ever said that he actually believed they were going to give us that, but according to everything else that he's taught us about the enemy, that was just an idea of what justice would look like if white folks were sincere about giving us justice. So today, you know, we have a new generation that the minister is, I mean, on a universal, on a national scale, teaching, either directly by straight contact or indirectly by his example and the lessons he gave at 10, 10, 15, right? So he said at that point, of course, remember, he said, we're going to DC for justice and we're not coming back until we get it. Well, what may he have meant by that? Because obviously we weren't going to stay in DC and sit on the Capitol lawn, but the mentality and the idea that we're going to demand justice so that our enemy knows that we have not forgotten, but at the same time, we're going to start redistributing the pain, see those who are willing to conversate with us, but we're not even waiting for that. It's time for us to do what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad told us to do a long time ago, and which now the time is demanding that we do immediately, is support our own businesses. And we hear the minister, of course, encouraging us to support Black-owned businesses, and then also encouraging us to get in business, start making something. You know, when it comes to us being in business right now, it gotta act like we're in the water with no boat, and if we don't tread water, we're gonna drown.
Yes, sir. Everything
else is secondary when you want to breathe, right? Everything else is secondary. So he told the believers, go make something in your home. Start making something, right? Because if you have a product, you can always have something to sell, yes, right? And you can always make money with it. So there's a I think the guys from LinkedIn, here's another one of them, studied the white man for what's successful. But I think LinkedIn founder said this about event planning and about having an anniversary event. He said, if you look back 4 or 5 years, 10 years at your first event and you're not embarrassed, then you started too late. Right? If you're waiting for everything to be perfect, another way to say, don't wait for perfection to start your business. You start developing your craft and get out there and build it as you grow. Montgomery Ward started out selling watches at the job he worked at, out of his car. And that's how he built Montgomery Wards. What's the guy from Nike? The guy from Nike was selling other people's shoes before he started developing his own Nike shoe. So we marvel at where they are now, but we don't know what they took to get there. And many of our businesses are the same way. So I don't know if that totally answered the question, but of course, redistributing the pain, putting that idea of what justice looks like out there, and then us getting into business and going into business for ourselves and organizing our community to be both the business owner and the consumer of the businesses in our community.
Yes, sir. And the beautiful thing about Brother Toure Muhammad, and this is, I know you come out with a new one, but yeah, he's not just talking about it. This is, you could tell it's a little wrinkled. So this is one of the copies from back in the day that I think I got from, what was it, the store that was on 70 something in Jeffrey. We had the Respect for Life, the Special Respect for Life.
Right, right.
So, and Brother Toure has several other books I'm looking online right now. There's a new edition of the Chronology of the Nation of Islam. Yes. He has Chicago Self-Made Business Pioneer, Social Entrepreneurs Everyone Should Know About. Is there anything else I missed?
That's the main two. And that book, that Social Entrepreneurs Everyone Should Know About, of course, the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad is in there for creating such an incredible vision for us to look what we can do for the future. Man, what he produced between 1930 and 1975 is absolutely amazing. And you know, the base and bulk of it was right here in Chicago. So I highlight him. You know, of course, to us, he really is the premier highlight. But then I highlighted some others too that we have lessons we can pull from. And I use that book to go into the school system and talk about, you know, to encourage these young people to get into business for themselves, to be entrepreneurs, because that's what we need for the future.
Thank you, Brother Toure. I'm looking online and I see at least 2 people who are showing up. I want to thank Janine Boynes for logging in, one of my co-workers, and as well as Brother Jonathan, who's from the Justice OL's local organizing committee. And he says, I love to see this event as a live event. People need to hear the information and move on it. So thank you for joining us. And for those who will join us afterwards at the recording. We're getting close to that time, so I want to make sure that I touch on that. The last question, which you've already kind of touched on it a few times in different ways, but I think it's really important that when we have these discussions or have any discussion, that we're really clear on what we should walk away and do. We have a lot of beautiful conversations, and I know you're probably familiar with Brother Akil, who wrote the book From Niggas to Gods.
Yes, yes.
It's either in the preface or the introduction. He says something that always sticks in my mind, and it don't sound all that good, but the language really sticks in my mind. And he talks about intellectual you smiling because you know where I'm going. Intellectual masturbation.
Right.
We do these things that in this conversation it feels good, but at the end of the day, if we don't produce anything, then it's worthless.
Right. That's right.
So just kind of want to touch on a few things with that. Is that last question? You know, I said that there was 3 questions. And of course, as I said, you've already touched on, but I want to make sure that we really end on those, and that's the clear point. And I'll change it up a little bit. And I guess I'll ask it like this. I'll go ahead and ask the last question which is what should be included in the curriculum to fulfill what we should expect, or in particular, what you expect the education system to produce. Is the Ministry of Education is hard at work. And what would you, as an entrepreneur and businessman, say, man, you all need to make sure that these things are included in the curriculum?
Man, yes, sir. Man, that's a important one. I'll try to touch on maybe 1 or 2 now, and I know as I think about it, there'll probably be more things that come up. But when we boil down, right, the core things of the Nation of Islam and the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, right? It's knowledge of self and God, knowledge of other than self, and knowledge of the time and what must be done, right? So if we put that in the curriculum in terms of business and entrepreneurism, right? Knowledge of self, as much information that we can pull of our experience here in America that relates to business and of our enemy, and study, right? Everything we need to know. I mean, our internal direct history. We need to know every aspect of what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad accomplished in business for us. We know it don't need to be a surprise to the student at MUI that we had a cannery, that we had a printing press, that we had all this farmland. You know, those are things that need to be in the core of the curriculum. So when they come out of school, they know what we did in business. They know those of us who did business that may not have been in the nation, but heralded the principles that we hold dear. Like S.B. Fuller. S.B. Fuller was at a job working for a white man here in Chicago, and that he was reading a book on sales. And that white man told him, "Why are you reading that book? You know, you don't have an education. You can't be a salesman." At that time, you had to have a high education to be a salesman, I guess, right? And he said, "As long as you work for me, I'll make sure that you have money and you have a job. I'll take care of you." S.B. Fuller quit at an instant. He said, "You know what? I'm giving you my 2-week notice. I'll stay long enough to prepare somebody that I'll train to take my place. But I know that as long as I depend upon you for what I need to live, I'll never be free." He told him that on the spot, right? So that courage to walk off, and I'm not encouraging anybody. Don't blame me. Don't blame me if you walk on a job and don't work for you. But I'm just saying that was his spirit. Then he went, bought some soap, wholesale, sold it retail, door to door, and eventually bought the soap company that he was buying the soap from wholesale, started making his own soap, and got so big that he was selling. He had salesmen down south who were white, who was selling soap for him, didn't know they was working for a black-owned company. So those kind of examples, right, we can pull from and have those as part of our curriculum in business on what our people have accomplished in business, right? Then number 2, we had to study how the enemy has used mass communications, marketing to destroy our community, right? We need to understand why Black people buy more soap and perfume than other people. We need to understand why we got to have the latest Jordans, why we have to have the best clothes and walking around with no house and maybe a car, right? There's a mentality that went along with that the enemy has created conditions and they're pushing buttons, right? When Honorable Elijah Muhammad, when Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan said this, based upon his study of the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, that the diameter of your thinking determines the circumference of your activity. So if the white man is teaching us, he's controlling our education system and the media. The minister said it recently, when you can control what a person sees and hears, you control what they think. Right? So if that is the case, we need to understand how mass media is being used to manipulate us to do what we're doing today, right? That's how to be a part of the curriculum. And then the core basic mechanics of business, just like it should be. And Dr. Ridgely mentioned this when on the interview you did with him, how it used to be that schools had auto mechanics in the class in the school, and so in those schools that were vocational, whether you were going into that field or not, you got some idea of how a car works and to fix the basic things, right? We should know the basics about being in business, whether we want to be in business or not. So even if we may not want to have the vision, but we know how to create something. And so we need to be thinking, okay, let me learn these aspects of business. Let me be taught these in class, in school, so that when we pool our resources together, when 8 or 9 pull their resources together, like the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, everybody has the basic core mechanics of understanding how business should be ran and operated, so that we don't have to go argue about that point. So nobody has to argue about the fact you gotta, create a corporation. Nobody's arguing about the fact that you have to have a place to produce the product. Some of those basic stuff they'll know because they've all been through the basic things of how to build a business. You went blank. I don't know if you can still hear me, Brother Troy, but the screen went blank. It still says live up here, but I don't know if I'm still on the call. Oh, there you are.
Yes, sir. I dropped out. I'm clicking button sharing and dropping. But I think we're right back on live. So I didn't get the last point that you're making, but
okay. I panicked there. I forgot I know what was going on. But I was talking about business in terms of us understanding through getting a part of our curriculum, having a basic understanding of what it takes to start and run a business.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Now, the other thing is that you directed that even though there's a big overlap, everybody who's watching this may not necessarily be, I was about to say may not be an educator. Everybody who's watching this may not necessarily see themselves as an educator. But is there anything that you could just think of that outside of what we're going to include in the curriculum that, I think is really important that when we have presentations as well, is that everybody walks away with something. What is there one note? There's probably multiple things that will come to your mind that individuals can walk away and commit to doing. But is there anything specifically that, right now you can go do this right now? You don't have to wait. You don't have to say, like you said, you don't have to wait till you get it all perfected and all of that. But is there something that you would advise that we just go out and just, take that first step?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think if it from the consumer standpoint, right? Look at your budget, look at your monthly income, and determine that you're going to give 10-20% of your money that you earn to a Black-owned business.
Wow.
Right. Just do that. We know some of it's gonna go, quick to the car note and the house note. So you already got a bulk going that ain't Black-owned right there, light bill, gas bill. So I know it's gonna diminish a lot, but man, find 10 to 20% if you can, and spend in that Black-owned business. And then for those of us who understand and want to get into business, the first thing I will probably encourage you to do is whatever business you're thinking about, man, take the next 2 weeks and learn as much as you can about that business. Learn the ins and outs, everything. Go on YouTube and just figure out, just soak in as much knowledge about that business as you can, and then give yourself a date to get started on doing something to move your business forward. And if it's every month, just have something that you're doing that's just inching you further towards that business being an actual business where people can do trade and commerce with you.
Thank you, Brother Toure. We're at that hour. I want you to, the last thing we'll close out on is that I asked you for a video or an audio clip of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, and I have that one ready. So can you kind of just, as we close out, just kind of explain why this video and just set it up for me. And as soon as you finish, I'll play the video and then we'll just close out on that.
Absolutely. Well, one of the things that the minister is so valuable to our communities because he gives vision. And you mentioned earlier about people that we dialogue and network with in business that are not in the nation. But I've run into so many, they're not registered believers, but they say, man, you know what? I want to do business with the Muslims because 10 years ago, I heard the minister say this and it encouraged me to get into business. 20 years ago, I was at the Million Man March and the minister said something, and this is why I'm in business right now, right? So we have people who are literally in business because of the word that they heard from our beloved minister. And in some ways, they moved out when those of us who heard that same word about getting into business did not do it, right? So they're looking to do business with us, and we need to do business with them. And so this clip kind of just gives a vision of what we need to be doing together, regardless if we're registered or unregistered. We're in the nation, and we believe that our people need to have a safe and clean community.
Why can't we tap these international sources to bring goods into America from your own brothers in third world countries and undersell, sell it at a lower price than what that same merchandise is going for, and capture the market of our people's dollars? Put it right back into the church. Then the church begins to swell financially. Then you start buying up blocks of property that they're tearing up. We buy it up. Church can do it because the church got more money than banks. In fact, the church's money is what's supporting the banks. Suppose the church bought up a lot of the property in Gary that's falling down. Look at these young brothers that don't have jobs and don't have skills. And look at our skilled black people as carpenters and brick masons and electricians and plumbers who don't have work. Why don't you marry the youth to the skill and start building up the community block by block by block? Then, Reverend, look in the church. Who needs an apartment? You go live there, sister. Cut the rent for them. Since we own it, start competing with others. And then the world will say, these Negroes ain't Negroes no more. They're up. They're getting their act together. The church can do it. Economic development can start with the church. And can you imagine, beloved? Suppose the Muslims and the Baptists and the AME and the Church of God in Christ sit down together as people who believe in God and say, can we do something together now? All right. I know we can do it.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Brother Toure. I
Brother,
just want to acknowledge one thing that somebody said, which I know we won't get onto it, but we had Janine that says that as much money we spend on food, that we can start there with 10% there. And I know you have a initiative that you're moving out on with helping people find Black-owned, in particular, restaurants in the community. So
right.
Can you send a shout out on that real quick for us? And let people know where they can find out more about the things that you're doing with the Bean Soup Times and all of that.
Absolutely, man. Thank you, brother. So definitely first, there are two key initiatives that I'm working on. One is Black Chicago Eats. It's the largest directory of Black-owned restaurants in Chicago. And we'll be doing something towards the end of the summer that's going to be real huge around July 29th to August 12th. So go to the website to get more information. But then also the Healthy Food Hub. Every week, they have fresh fruits and produce and other products from Black-owned vendors in Chicago. So you can go to their website. And then those of us, of course, who are part of the Nation of Islam, the ABLE program, the ABLE network is doing phenomenal stuff, bringing great food to us. And we have some some items at the mosque every Sunday. Folks can come by and pick up some produce, or at least get into the loop and know when it's going to be ready and when we got stuff coming from the farm and the whole nine. So that's definitely two things. And if anybody wants to get in touch with me, go to my website, beansouptimes.com. You can email me at Toure, Toure, at beansouptimes.com, brother. And man, I love what you're doing here, Brother Troy. This is so key and important. So I thank you for inviting me on and giving me an opportunity to talk about things that I enjoy talking about. And man, may Allah continue to bless you in this work to help us to change the educational paradigm.
Thank you, Brother Toure. Now I'm gonna put this on tape, and then we're gonna close out. I'm looking forward to working with you in the future, and I know all the things that you've talked about with marketing. We're gonna have to definitely pull you in to help push this initiative for the Ministry of Education and this new educational paradigm, and get you on board with that. Which I'm gonna speak for you. I know you have no problem with that. It was interesting that clip that, you know, when the minister's clip came up, we saw another brother who's definitely doing the work as it relates to business, and that's Dr. Boyce Watkins. And he has these classes that he's offering. But me and you need to get together, because all that you had, I mean, we can definitely put something together that will benefit our people. So I'll put it on camera on YouTube. So I'm gonna hold you accountable, and you're gonna help me move outside of just talking about business and into that space as well. So with that said, thank you all. I hope you enjoy this, and I look forward to you next month with the new educational paradigm. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.